Imagine eating dinner in the scorching summer heat. No fridge, no freezer, no ice, no grocery store for hundreds of miles. Now imagine eating the exact same 5 foods every single day for 3 months straight. The same breakfast, the same lunch, the same dinner for 90 days. That was life on a cattle drive. And those 5 foods, they would be illegal to serve in a modern American prison. Courts would call it cruel and unusual punishment. But for cowboys in the 1800s, that was just another Tuesday on the trail. This diet did more than bore them to tears. It destroyed their teeth. It caused scurvy. It led to vitamin deficiencies so severe that doctors today would classify it as malnutrition. And that's if the food didn't kill them first. Because sometimes it absolutely did. The hearty cowboy meals you see in old Western movies never existed. Real trail food was barely edible on day 1. By week 3, it turned dangerous. By week 6, cowboys were choking down things that would shut down restaurants immediately. Over the next several minutes, we're breaking down the actual cowboy diet, what they really ate, what it tasted like. And most importantly, what it did to their bodies after weeks and months of the same monotonous meals. Let's start with the food everyone thinks cowboys loved more than anything: beef. Cowboys drove thousands of cattle across the American plains. They were surrounded by fresh beef 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, obviously, they ate juicy steaks every night, right? Dead wrong. Being surrounded by thousands of cattle meant absolutely nothing when that cattle wasn't theirs to eat. Cowboys were hired to deliver cattle to market alive. Every cow that died or got slaughtered came straight out of the boss's profit. Trail bosses kept obsessive counts of their herds. Kill a cow for dinner, and that's $30 in 1880s money gone, which was more than most cowboys made in an entire week. That money came out of someone's pocket, and that someone was not happy about it. Cowboys could only eat beef under specific circumstances. When a cow broke its leg and couldn't walk, when a rattlesnake bit it and it was dying anyway, when it developed disease and had to be culled, or when the trail boss specifically authorized a slaughter. That happened maybe once every week or two if the crew got lucky. When they did slaughter a cow, it had to feed 10 to 15 grown men for multiple days, in weather that often hit 90 degrees or higher, with zero refrigeration. A typical cattle drive involved 3,000 head of cattle, about 12 cowboys, and 60 to 90 days on the trail. Most drives slaughtered maybe 6 to 10 cattle for food during the entire journey. That works out to roughly 50 servings of fresh beef per cowboy for 3 months of hard labor. Think about working at a chocolate factory, but being banned from eating the chocolate. Now stretch that torture out for 90 days straight, while doing back-breaking physical work in extreme heat. So if they rarely touched fresh beef, what did they actually eat? Salt beef. Calling it beef is generous. Salt beef was exactly what it sounds like. Beef that had been preserved in salt, not a little salt. An obscene amount of salt. Enough salt to keep meat from rotting for months in a hot wagon. But surviving months without spoiling came at a serious cost to anyone trying to eat it. First, you had to soak the salt beef overnight, just to remove enough salt to make it physically possible to swallow, while doing back-breaking physical work in extreme heat. Sometimes it needed a full 24 hours in water. If you didn't soak it long enough, and tried to eat it anyway, you'd dehydrate faster than the desert sun could manage on its own. Even after soaking for a day, it was still incredibly salty. The texture felt like chewing on boot leather. One cowboy wrote in his diary that it tasted like what would happen if sadness and regret somehow became a food. You couldn't grill it or fry it like normal meat. It needed to be boiled or stewed for hours just to reach a texture that human teeth could actually chew through. The camp cook would throw it in a Dutch oven at sunrise for dinner that night, and it would simmer all day long. Most of the nutritional value was already gone. Salt curing keeps meat from rotting, but destroys almost all the vitamins in the process. What remained was basically protein and more salt, nothing else. Eating salt beef day after day wasn't just boring. It was medically dangerous. The constant salt intake caused dehydration, high blood pressure, and put massive stress on the kidneys. The toughness of the meat absolutely demolished cowboy teeth. Chewing leather-hard meat for months wore down tooth enamel, cracked molars, and caused painful abscesses. By age 30, the average cowboy had already lost about 40% of his teeth. The high salt content triggered chronic digestive problems. Constipation became normal. Stomach cramps were daily occurrences. Combined with limited access to clean water during long stretches between rivers, cowboys existed in a state of constant physical discomfort. But salt beef was only the beginning. If there's one food more associated with cowboys than beef, it's beans. And unlike the beef situation, this reputation is completely accurate. Cowboys ate beans for breakfast. They ate beans for lunch. They ate beans for dinner. Every single day for months. Beans were the perfect trail food for all the wrong reasons. They cost almost nothing. They weighed very little compared to their caloric value. They didn't spoil. They packed decent protein. You could cook massive amounts at once. A pound of beans cost about 10 cents in 1880. A pound of almost anything else cost 3 to 5 times that amount. For a trail boss feeding a dozen men for 3 months on a tight budget, beans became a mathematical certainty. The camp cook could dump a huge pot of beans on the fire at breakfast and let them cook all day. By dinner, they were ready. Minimal effort, maximum calorie. From a pure logistics standpoint, beans were actually genius. Trail cooks tried their best to add variety to bean preparation. Plain beans one day, beans with bacon grease the next, beans with chunks of salt pork, bean soup, refried beans. But at the end of the day, they were still just beans. Cowboys ate beans for breakfast, beans for lunch, and beans for dinner. One cowboy's trail diary mentions eating beans for 47 consecutive days without a single break. He actually kept count. Now let's talk about what eating beans 3 times a day for months actually does to the human digestive system. The gas alone became legendary. Cowboy diaries and personal accounts mention it constantly, not as jokes, but as genuine medical complaints. Sleeping in close quarters with 11 other men who had all consumed beans 3 times that day meant the air quality dropped to almost unbreathable levels. Beans provide decent protein and good fiber, which sounds healthy, but they provide almost 0 vitamin C, 0 vitamin A, barely any calcium, and limited B vitamins. Without other foods to balance things out, a diet heavy on beans leads directly to deficiency diseases that would eventually cripple the men eating them. If the beans weren't cooked long enough, which happened constantly when the cook was rushed or firewood ran short, they could cause serious digestive distress. Beans that stayed too hard could actually cause intestinal blockages. Cowboys learned real fast to test bean tenderness before taking that first bite. The psychological toll of eating identical food for every meal can't be overstated. Food provides more than just calories. It gives us sensory variety, emotional satisfaction, cultural connection. One account describes a cowboy offering $5 for a single apple, which represented an entire week of his wages. He never got that apple. Medical records from the era show cowboys arriving at trail's end with significant weight loss, obvious vitamin deficiencies, chronic digestive disorders, and complete physical exhaustion. And these weren't even normal canned beans you could just heat up. Dried beans required overnight soaking before you could even start cooking them, then hours more on the fire. If the cook forgot to soak them or didn't have time, they'd take all day to cook and still end up partially hard and almost impossible to digest. During that overnight soaking period, the beans sat in water that attracted insects, collected dust, and grew bacteria. The water you dumped out the next morning before cooking often looked disturbing enough that no one examined it too closely. Cooking beans required a constant fire, which meant constant wood collection. On the treeless plains of Texas and Kansas, that often meant burning buffalo chips, which is a polite way of saying dried animal manure. Cowboys ate beans that had been cooked over burning poop for hours. That's the reality of trail food. Humans need carbohydrates to survive. On the trail, carbs came from something called hardtack. If you thought beans and salt beef sounded bad, wait until you hear about hardtack. Hardtack was a cracker made from exactly 3 ingredients: flour, water, and salt. That's it. Mix them together, roll the dough flat, bake it until it becomes rock solid, and that's your bread for the next 90 days. The word tack comes from thumbtack, because these crackers were literally that hard. They could survive months or even years without spoiling, because nothing could live in them or break them down. Cowboys called them tooth dullers, sheet iron crackers, and worm castles. We'll get to that last nickname in a minute. Each hardtack piece measured about 3 inches by 3 inches. Cowboys got rationed about 6 pieces per day. That was their bread, their grain, their entire carbohydrate source besides beans. You couldn't just bite into hardtack like a normal cracker. Try that, and you'd crack a tooth instantly. Remember, there's no dentist within 500 miles, and a broken tooth on the trail often meant infection and potentially death. Cowboys had to soak hardtack in their coffee or water for several minutes just to soften it enough to chew. Even after soaking, it still required serious jaw strength to break down. It tasted like absolutely nothing, just bland, slightly salty cardboard texture. One cowboy described it as what regret would taste like if regret somehow became a food item. Now about that Worm Castle nickname. Hardtack stored in barrels for weeks or months became infested with weevils. These small beetles would lay eggs directly in the hardtack. Their larvae would burrow through it, creating tunnels and holes throughout each piece. Hence the term Worm Castle. This wasn't a rare problem. This was completely normal and expected. Cowboys learned to just accept that their hardtack would be crawling with bugs. One surveyor's report from 1875 noted that roughly 60% of hardtack in a typical supply barrel showed visible weevil infestation. Cowboys developed strategies to deal with the bugs. Tap the hardtack on the table, and weevils would crawl out of the holes. Eat it at night, so you couldn't see the worms moving around. Soak it in coffee, and the weevils would float to the surface where you could skim most of them off. Most of them. But here's the really disturbing part. Many cowboys just ate the weevils and larvae without bothering to remove them. Extra protein. They joke that the worms were already there, and you needed the protein anyway. This wasn't humor. This was complete resignation to a situation they couldn't control. Eating insect larvae and beetles isn't immediately fatal, but it's also not sanitary by any measure. Combined with everything else cowboys were consuming, it added to the overall parasitic and bacterial load on their digestive systems. But even perfectly clean hardtack with zero bug infestation was nutritionally worthless. White flour, water, and salt. No vitamins, no minerals beyond tiny trace amounts. Almost no fiber. Just empty carbohydrates that provided quick energy, but absolutely zero sustenance beyond that. Combined with salt beef and beans, cowboys were consuming a diet of protein, carbs, and dangerous amounts of salt, with almost no micronutrients whatsoever. This is the exact recipe for developing scurvy, pellagra, and other deficiency diseases that would slowly destroy them from the inside. Which brings us to the one food item that actually had some nutritional value. Coffee, if you can even call it food. Cowboys were absolutely obsessed with coffee. The camp cook's most important job, more important than cooking beans or preparing salt beef, was keeping the coffee pot going at all times. No coffee meant an immediate drop in morale, and a real possibility of the crew straight up refusing to work. Cowboys drank coffee in the morning. They drank it at noon. They drank it at night. Not small cups either. Full metal mugs. Multiple times every single day. The average cowboy consumed somewhere between 8 to 12 cups of coffee per day. The coffee pot never stopped brewing. Trail coffee was strong enough to, as cowboys said, float a horseshoe or grow hair on your chest. They weren't exaggerating by much. The cook would use roughly 3 times the amount of coffee grounds that we'd use today for the same amount of water. The result was coffee so strong it could practically stand up and walk on its own. Remember, they had no paper filters, no percolators, no fancy brewing equipment. Coffee grounds went straight into boiling water. After it boiled for a while, the cook would pour in some cold water to make the grounds settle to the bottom. Then, everyone would drink it with grounds still floating in their cups. You couldn't avoid swallowing grounds with every sip. Coffee provided the only mental break from monotony. The only source of warmth on freezing mornings. The only comfort food available. One cowboy's diary entry states that he would rather skip dinner than go without his morning coffee. But nobody talks about what was actually in that trail. Coffee beyond the grounds themselves. Coffee was only as clean as the water used to make it. Trail water came from streams, rivers, waterholes, and creeks that also served as drinking sources for thousands of cattle and every wild animal in the area. That water didn't get filtered. It didn't get treated. It just went straight into the pot and started boiling. Coffee was expensive, so grounds got reused day after day. Today's coffee grounds became part of tomorrow's batch. The cook would just add fresh grounds on top of the old ones. By week 3 of a cattle drive, you were drinking coffee made partially from grounds that were 3 weeks old. The coffee pot itself rarely got properly cleaned. Cowboys considered it seasoned, which was a nice way of saying it had accumulated layers of oils, residue, and bacterial films over weeks of constant use, plus dust, dead insects, and whatever else blew into it during windstorms on the open plains. To stretch limited coffee supplies, dishonest suppliers would sometimes mix in chicory, burnt grain, or other filler substances. Cowboys learned to recognize when their coffee had been cut with cheap additives. But they drank it anyway because the alternative was no coffee at all. Drinking 10 cups of extremely strong coffee every single day for months created serious caffeine dependence. Cowboys would develop splitting headaches, become irritable and aggressive, and lose all energy if they couldn't get their coffee fix. That much caffeine, including cups consumed right before bed, completely disrupted normal sleep patterns. Combined with night watch duties, where cowboys had to stay awake guarding the herd, and uncomfortable sleeping conditions on the hard ground, they became chronically sleep deprived. The caffeine masked how physically exhausted and nutritionally depleted their bodies actually were. The energy came from a drug, not from actual nutrition or rest. 4 foods: salt beef, beans, hardtack, and coffee. That was 95% of the cowboy diet for 3 months straight. But occasionally, very rarely, other foods would appear on the trail, and somehow these treats often came with their own set of problems. Molasses was one of the few luxury items carried on the chuck wagon. Thick, sweet, and dark, it provided sugar calories and a desperately needed break from endless savory food. Cowboys would pour molasses on their hardtack, mix it into their beans, or just eat it straight from the barrel with a spoon. It was valuable enough that the cook had to monitor portions carefully. But molasses stored in wooden barrels, bouncing around in a wagon, sitting in 95-degree heat, it attracted every insect within a 5-mile radius. Flies, ants, and beetles all tried desperately to get into that barrel. Cowboys learned to expect bugs in their molasses and just ate around them when possible. That much sugar combined with zero toothbrushing for 3 months destroyed teeth faster than almost anything else on the trail. The brief pleasure of tasting something sweet came at the cost of severe long-term dental decay and rot. Because molasses was so highly valued, the cook had to ration it very strictly. This led to conflicts and resentment among the crew. More than one cowboy's personal account mentions arguments breaking out over molasses portions. Cowboys desperately needed fat for energy during hard physical labor. That fat came primarily from one source: bacon grease. Every single drop of bacon grease got saved and reused. The cook would use it to fry beans, cook hardtack, and some cowboys even added it to their coffee for extra calories. Nothing went to waste. Bacon grease was kept in metal tins or glass jars and used for days or weeks. In extreme summer heat, it would go rancid. The smell turned sour. The taste became bitter. Cowboys learned to smell for rancidity before eating, though that didn't always stop them from consuming it anyway, when they were hungry enough. Eating rancid fats, combined with the dangerously high-salt diet and extreme physical work in brutal heat, created perfect conditions for cardiovascular problems. Historical medical records show cowboys experiencing heart attacks and strokes at surprisingly young ages. Old bacon grease caused frequent and severe digestive problems. But cowboys needed those fat calories badly enough that they'd eat it regardless of the consequences. When a trail passed near a settlement or trading post, cowboys would sometimes be able to buy or trade for fresh vegetables, fruit, eggs, or milk. These moments were celebrated like holidays. But after weeks or months of eating only preserved foods, their digestive systems often couldn't handle fresh food anymore. Stomachs that had adapted to the monotonous diet would rebel against variety. Cowboys would get violently sick from eating fresh produce that their bodies could no longer process. Fresh food from frontier sources wasn't necessarily safe either. Milk wasn't pasteurized. Eggs weren't kept cold. Vegetables weren't washed with clean water. Food poisoning from these special treats happened regularly. When cowboys did manage to get fresh food, the temptation to eat too much too fast became overwhelming. After months of dreaming about variety, self-control disappeared completely. Overeating fresh food after prolonged deprivation caused serious illness that sometimes proved worse than just sticking with the regular diet. Fresh food also cost a fortune by cowboy standards. A single apple or orange could cost 50 cents, which represented half a day's wages. Cowboys had to choose between eating better and having any money left when they finally reached the end of the trail. So we've covered what cowboys ate for 3 months straight. Now let's talk about what that diet actually did to their bodies, because this wasn't just uncomfortable. This was medically catastrophic. Zero vitamin C in the diet meant scurvy. Symptoms included bleeding gums, teeth becoming loose and falling out, old wounds reopening, severe joint pain, complete exhaustion, and skin problems. Cowboys might not have known what scurvy was, but they experienced every symptom on a regular basis. Historical medical records describe cowboys arriving at trail's end with bleeding gums and extreme fatigue after roughly 6 weeks. One trail boss's journal mentions that by week 8, 7 out of his 12-man crew had developed these symptoms. No vitamin A caused night blindness. Cowboys assigned to night watch duty, responsible for guarding the herd from cattle thieves and predators, literally couldn't see in the dark. After weeks of severe vitamin deficiency, This made their job nearly impossible and made cattle theft significantly easier for rustlers. Limited B vitamins led to pellagra symptoms, painful skin lesions, chronic diarrhea, and mental confusion that looked like dementia. Period medical accounts described cowboys developing mysterious skin problems and mental fog. These were symptoms of pellagra that nobody understood or could treat. There was no treatment available because cowboys and doctors didn't understand what caused these problems. They just endured progressive weakness and illness, assuming it was normal trail sickness or bad luck. Let's talk about what this diet did to cowboy teeth over time. The combination was absolutely devastating. Tough salt beef wearing down tooth enamel for hours every day, rock-hard hardtack cracking teeth, sugar from molasses causing rapid decay, zero dental hygiene for months, vitamin C deficiency causing severe gum disease, and constant dehydration causing chronic dry mouth. By age 25, the average cowboy had lost roughly 40% of their teeth. By age 30, that number jumped to about 60%. A frontier dentist's records from 1883 show that out of 50 cowboys he examined, 47 had serious dental infections. Tooth loss meant inability to chew the already tough food, which accelerated malnutrition. Dental abscesses caused blood infections that absolutely could and did kill people. Chronic tooth pain affected mood, sleep quality, and work performance every single hour. Frontier dentistry meant tooth extraction using whiskey for anesthesia and blacksmith pliers as tools. Or you just suffered with the infected tooth until it fell out on its own, or you died from the infection spreading to your blood. Despite eating what seems like plenty of beans and beef, cowboys often operated at a serious caloric deficit. The physical demands of the job exceeded the energy provided by the food. Cowboys commonly lost 20 to 30 pounds during a single cattle drive. One account describes a cowboy weighing himself before leaving Texas, and again after arriving in Kansas 3 months later. He had lost 34 pounds. Insufficient protein quality, combined with extreme physical labor, meant muscle wasting, even while doing physical work all day long. Their bodies were literally eating their own muscle tissue to survive. After arriving at the end of the trail, cowboys needed several weeks to recover their physical condition, assuming they could afford enough food to actually recover. The physical damage was obvious and well documented. The psychological toll was more insidious, but just as real. Food provides much more than just nutrition. It gives us psychological satisfaction, cultural connection, sensory variety, and emotional comfort. Eating 5 identical foods for months caused documented psychological distress that shows up in countless cowboy diaries and letters. Period writings describe depression, constant irritability, obsessive fixation on food fantasies, and vivid dreams about eating varied meals. Cowboys would spend hours every day discussing in detail what they planned to eat when the drive finally ended. Food fantasies became genuinely obsessive. One diary entry describes a cowboy who dreamed about eating fresh fruit every single night for 2 weeks straight. The monotony contributed heavily to interpersonal conflicts among the crew. Small disputes that should have been minor would escalate into serious fights. Irritability from malnutrition and lack of food variety created legitimately dangerous situations. Some cowboys developed disordered relationships with food that lasted years after leaving the trail, either hoarding food when it became available or developing an inability to enjoy meals due to trauma associations with food and suffering. Despite all of this horror, cowboys did survive. Some even came back for multiple cattle drives. How did they manage it? Through a combination of desperate ingenuity and pure biological adaptation. Cowboys would supplement their diet whenever physically possible. Wild onions growing on the prairie, prickly pear cactus fruit, wild berries, any edible plant they could identify. A camp cook who knew his plants was worth his weight in gold. When allowed, and when the opportunity appeared, they'd hunt small game. Rabbits, prairie dogs, wild birds, even rattlesnakes. Any source of fresh meat was celebrated, no matter how unappetizing it might sound to modern people. Cowboys would trade with Native Americans, homesteaders, or other travelers they encountered. Tools, labor, or information could be exchanged for fresh food, finding abandoned food caches. Buying supplies from passing wagons or stopping at frontier settlements meant grabbing any opportunity for dietary variety. Human bodies can adapt to severe nutritional stress up to a point. Cowboys' digestive systems became incredibly efficient at extracting maximum nutrition from extremely limited food sources. What would make modern people violently ill, things like weevil-infested hardtack, rancid bacon grease, and contaminated water, their systems learned to tolerate through sheer necessity. Bodies operated in survival mode for months, slowing down metabolism, prioritizing only essential functions, becoming incredibly efficient with every calorie. This biological adaptation came at a massive cost to long-term health. When cattle drives finally ended and cowboys reached their destination, tradition held that they'd spend their entire 3 months of wages on food. The end of trail feast was legendary. Fresh beefsteaks, real vegetables, pies, cakes, everything they'd dreamed about for 90 days. But after months of severe deprivation, their stomachs couldn't actually handle it. Cowboys regularly made themselves seriously ill from overeating, or from consuming foods their bodies could no longer process properly. Then most of them would sign up for another cattle drive and do it all over again. Think about what you ate today. You probably had variety in flavors and textures, nutritional balance across food groups, fresh ingredients, protection from contamination through food safety laws, the ability to choose what you wanted to eat. All of that represents luxury that cowboys couldn't even imagine. Food variety in every single meal, refrigeration keeping things fresh, nutritional labeling, food safety regulations, vitamin supplements, dental care, clean water, the simple ability to choose. Every one of these modern conveniences exists because generations of people suffered without them. Cowboys didn't just endure monotonous diets for months. They literally sacrificed their bodies and long-term health to build the cattle industry that eventually made modern food abundance possible in America. When we romanticize cowboy life in movies and books, we erase the genuine physical suffering that came with it. These men gave their teeth, their health, and years of their lives to move cattle across an entire continent. Be honest with yourself. How long could you actually survive on nothing but beans, salt beef, wormy hardtack, and coffee? 1 week? 3 days? 1 day? Next time you find yourself bored with your meal options or complaining about dinner, remember this. Cowboys ate the same 5 foods for 3 months at a time. Those 5 foods would be illegal to serve in prisons today. Courts would call it cruel and unusual punishment. Perspective changes everything. Don't forget to leave a like and a subscribe if you wish to help my channel grow. Thank you.